picture this for a second. It's the 1970s, and a political campaign is in full swing.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
No tweets, no endless Facebook posts, no targeted ads.
You're lucky to hear a catchy jingle on the radio, right?
Exactly. Campaigns back then were all about grassroots, volunteers knocking on doors, limited budgets.
That totally different world.
Right. Now, fast forward to today.
$1 million media blitzes.
Constant stream of information.
But targeted ads everywhere you look.
It's a whole different ballgame. So what changed?
Well, a lot of things, obviously, but one of the biggest game changers.
Let me guess.
Citizens United v. Federal Election Commission.
The case that everyone's still talking about.
Yeah.
Free speech, corporate influence, money in politics, the whole 9 yards.
Exactly.
That's what we're diving into today.
We're going deep on this one.
Chief Justice Roberts' concurring opinion in Citizens United.
We're going to unpack the arguments.
Break down the legal jargon.
And really try to understand why this case still matters so much today.
And just to be clear, we're not here to tell anyone what to think about this case.
No way.
Think of us more as your guides.
Yeah.
We're here to navigate the complexities. So, to set the stage, Citizens United was about a film.
A film?
Yeah, a film that was critical of Hillary Clinton, and it was funded by a conservative nonprofit.
Okay.
The big question, the constitutional question, was whether restricting that kind of corporate-funded political speech violated the First Amendment.
Big question. And what did the court say?
In a close 5-4 decision.
Yeah.
They said yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it did. And that's where Chief Justice Roberts' concurring opinion comes in.
He agreed with the majority.
He did, but he offered his own reasoning, his own perspective.
So he agreed with the outcome, but maybe not all the reasoning behind it. That's always interesting.
It's like getting a behind-the-scenes look
Exactly.
at how he sees the Constitution, the role of precedent. Why is that significant? Why should we care what Roberts thinks?
Well, he's the Chief Justice. He's not just deciding this case. His thinking influences how the court might rule on future cases.
It's like getting a sneak peek at his legal playbook.
Exactly.
So what stood out to you in Roberts' opinion? What were some of the key arguments that really shaped his thinking?
Well, one thing that jumps out right away is his deep even reverence, you could say, for the First Amendment.
Right?
He calls overturning any act of Congress based on the First Amendment the gravest and most delicate duty of the court.
Wow. That's powerful language. He's not taking this lightly.
Not at all. And this is where the concept of stare decisis comes in.
What is this?
The principle of respecting precedent, previous rulings.
Okay.
Roberts goes to great lengths to explain why overturning precedent is such a weighty matter, especially when you're talking about fundamental rights like free speech.
So it's not just about this one case. It's about staying consistent with past interpretations of the Constitution.
Exactly.
But hold on, didn't the court actually overturn a previous decision in Citizens United?
They did. Austin v. Michigan Chamber of Commerce. That case had upheld restrictions on corporate political spending.
So how does Roberts square that with this whole emphasis on stare decisis?
That's the key question, isn't it? He argues that while respecting precedent is crucial, it's not a straitjacket.
Okay, I like that. Not a straitjacket.
He says it's a principle of policy, not a mechanical formula.
So there's some wiggle room.
It means the court has to consider, if a previous ruling is truly flawed.
Or if it just doesn't make sense anymore.
Exactly. If it no longer serves those principles it was meant to uphold.
So he's saying we respect the past, but we can't be chained to it, especially when it comes to something as fundamental as free speech.
Exactly. And he backs this up with some pretty compelling examples. He brings up cases about segregation, minimum wage laws, even wiretapping.
Wow.
To show how blindly following precedent can sometimes lead to unjust outcomes.
It's like he's saying we've gotten things wrong before.
And we can't be afraid to correct those mistakes, even if it means overturning precedent.
Even if it ruffles some feathers.
And that brings us to the heart of why Roberts felt Austin had to go. He saw it as a departure from the court's core understanding of the First Amendment, a decision that, in his view, had created more problems than it solved.
Okay, so he felt strongly that Austin was a misstep.
He did.
But overturning it, that's a big deal. What were his main issues with Austin?
Roberts meticulously picks apart Austin, highlighting what he sees as its contradictions with earlier landmark cases like Buckley v. Valeo. To really understand his reasoning, we need to delve into some campaign finance law.
All right, lead the way. You're the expert.
I'll try to keep it clear.
We trust you.
One of the key phrases from Austin is this idea of The corrosive and distorting effects of wealth on elections.
Okay, so the idea being that too much money from corporations can drown out the voices of everyday citizens.
Exactly.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
If corporations can spend unlimited amounts of money, wouldn't that give them an unfair advantage in shaping public opinion, influencing elections?
That was the rationale behind Austin, but here's where it gets interesting. Roberts uses the government's own arguments in Citizens United to expose what he sees as the weaknesses in Austin's logic.
Wait, so the government was trying to defend a decision, but not the reasoning behind it.
It's fascinating, isn't it? They essentially distanced themselves from that original corrosive effects of wealth argument.
So they were clinging to the outcome, even if they weren't fully behind the reasons it came about. Why would they do that?
Well, it highlights how complex legal reasoning can be. The government might have felt that Austin, as a precedent, was still important to uphold, even if they couldn't fully defend the original rationale. But for Roberts, this was a red flag.
It's like they were saying, we like this house, but we're going to swap out the foundation and hope no one notices.
And Roberts wasn't buying it. He saw it as an attempt to basically radically reconceptualize Austin after the fact, which he found deeply, deeply problematic.
Okay, so he wasn't convinced by the government's attempts to kind of salvage Austin. So what does that mean for this case? What happens when you remove the foundation of a legal argument like that? It's like pulling the rug out from under the whole thing. What happens next?
Well, it creates this void, right? And the government tried to fill it. They came back in Citizens United with these new arguments.
Okay.
They shifted their focus to two main points.
Okay, let's hear them.
One, preventing what they called quid pro quo corruption.
Quid pro quo sounds serious.
It's a mouthful.
Like something out of a legal drama? What does that even mean?
Basically, it means this for that. In the context of campaign finance, it's this concern that large corporate donations could be seen as like bribes for political favors.
So the idea is if a corporation gives a ton of money to a candidate, they might expect something in return once that candidate is in office.
Exactly, exactly. It raises concerns about politicians being beholden to special interests, not actually representing, the people who elected them.
Right, right. Okay, and the other argument about protecting shareholders, what was that about?
So that one was about how corporations shouldn't be able to just spend shareholder money on political campaigns, at least not without their consent. They framed it as a matter of protecting shareholder rights.
Okay, both of those sound like reasonable concerns. I mean, on the surface. So why did Roberts reject them?
He acknowledged they were valid concerns, but his main issue was that these arguments weren't part of the original reasoning behind Austin. Remember how we were talking about stare decisis being about respecting the principles established in past cases?
Right, not just the outcome of the case, but the why behind it.
Exactly. And Roberts saw this as kind of a bait and switch. They were trying to prop up Austin with reasons that weren't even considered when the original decision was made.
It's getting trickier and trickier. So not only did the government seem hesitant to stand by the corrosive effects argument, but then they kind of threw these new arguments in. It makes you wonder, why did those points come up in the Austin case itself if they were so important?
You've hit on a key point. Roberts points out that very thing. He basically asks, if these were such compelling arguments, why weren't they raised in Austin?
Right, like it's almost as if they only became important when the original rationale for Austin started to crumble. They needed something, anything to fill that gap.
Exactly. And that, for Roberts, spoke volumes. It reinforced his view that Austin was just built on shaky ground. He even calls out the government for attempting to radically reconceptualize Austin's reasoning after the fact, which he saw as a dangerous precedent for future cases.
So it's not just about this one case. It's about the integrity of legal reasoning itself. He's worried about the government, rewriting the rules of the game after it's already been played.
Right, and it gets to the heart of this idea of judicial restraint courts not overstepping their bounds, not making new laws under the guise of interpreting old ones.
So Roberts isn't necessarily saying these new arguments are wrong. He's saying they're being introduced way too late in the game to justify upholding Austin. It's about playing fair, legally speaking.
Yeah.
But let's zoom out for a second. Why should the average person listening to this care about all this legal maneuvering? What's the big takeaway?
It's about the power of precedent, the importance of clear, consistent legal reasoning. Roberts is essentially saying if we allow courts to just invent new justifications for old decisions, it erodes the foundation of our legal system. And that has implications for everyone, not just corporations and campaign finance.
It's about making sure the rules are applied fairly and consistently no matter who's involved. So with Austin effectively, what, dismantled, what does that mean for Citizens United and the bigger picture of free speech?
That's where things get really, really interesting. And that's where Roberts' concurring opinion takes us beyond the specifics of this one case, into this much broader debate about the role of money in politics.
Because if corporations are free to spend unlimited amounts of money to support or oppose candidates,
Yeah.
that raises some big questions about, like, whose voices are actually being heard.
Exactly, exactly. And that's a theme we're going to explore in more detail as we, continue our deep dive into Citizens United.
Okay, so we've established that Austin is out, corporate spending on political campaigns is back in the game. But what does that really mean for everyday citizens like you?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it gets to the heart of what Roberts seems most concerned about, the balance of power in a democracy. He's essentially sounding the alarm about the potential consequences of treating corporate speech the same as individual speech.
Because a corporation, especially a massive one, has a much louder voice. More money equals more megaphones.
Precisely. Think about it. A corporation can pour enormous resources into getting its message out, TV ads, online campaigns, you name it. And that raises concerns about whether those with the deepest pockets end up having an outsized influence on elections.
It's like that old saying, freedom of the press belongs to those who own one. But now it's more like, freedom of speech belongs to those who can afford a stadium full of megaphones.
A stadium full of megaphones. I like that analogy. It really gets to the heart of the issue, doesn't it? And it's something Roberts seems acutely aware of. He even brings up an interesting what-if scenario.
You do tell.
He posits this. If the government can restrict corporate political speech, what's to stop them from regulating newspapers in the same way? After all, newspapers are businesses too.
Whoa, that's a huge EE implication. We generally consider newspapers essential to a free press, even though they operate within a corporate structure.
Exactly. And that's Robert's point. He's drawing a line in the sand, suggesting that allowing the government to silence one type of corporate speech could open the door to broader restrictions on free expression. He's urging us to think about the potential unintended consequences.
It's like he's saying, be careful what you wish for, because you might not like where it leads.
Precisely. And this is where the real debate begins. How do we balance the right to free speech with the potential for corporate influence to drown out other voices? It's a question that doesn't have easy answers.
Definitely food for thought. So, as we wrap up our deep dive into Citizens United and Chief Justice Roberts' intriguing concurring opinion, it feels like we're left with more questions than answers.
And that's not necessarily a bad thing. This case forces us to grapple with some fundamental questions about the role of money in politics, the nature of free speech in the 21st century, and how we ensure that all voices can be heard.
So, as we navigate this ever-evolving landscape of political speech and corporate influence, we'll leave you, our listener, with this final thought-provoking question. In an era where corporations wield immense power and influence, what does it truly mean to have a voice in a democracy?